Geraldine Kriégel and Patrick Kriégel lived in Ireland. In 2006, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. They had a wonderful relationship. Even though they faced infertility, they did not lose hope. Both had successful careers, financial stability, and they wanted to adopt. They were waiting for confirmation of their documents. Finally, Geraldine and Patrick received news that a 2-year-old girl from Russia is available for adoption. Her name was Anastasia. She was born on February 18, 2004, in Novokuznetsk, Russia. Immediately after birth, she was taken to an orphanage because her biological mother was unable to provide for her. Anastasia spent her entire childhood mostly alone, as the caregivers primarily focused on more demanding children. This lack of attention resulted in her having difficulty expressing emotions. Geraldine and Patrick was overjoyed when they learned about Anastasia. They quickly developed a close relationship with her. On August 10, 2006, they brought her home, and this date became a family holiday. From now on, her name is Anastasia Ana Kriégel, affectionately called Ana. The day when laughter filled their home was the day that Geraldine and Patrick truly became parents. They wanted Ana to remember her culture, so they bought her a matryoshka doll. The once quiet life of Geraldine and Patrick turned into a fun adventure. Ana was daddy's angel and mommy's princess. They tried to diversify their lives as much as possible. They went ice skating and planned excursions every summer. They vacationed in Patrick's hometown of Annecy, France, where they had a house, and Ana made several friends. She always looked forward to this trip, enjoyed France, and even studied French. However, there were obstacles in Ana's life. She struggled with learning English, and her mother helped her because she wanted Ana to be able to communicate with her peers. Ana also faced challenges in forming close relationships and expressing her emotions. Time spent without adequate care in the orphanage led her to be uncomfortable with physical affection. Nonetheless, Geraldine and Patrick were able to help Ana overcome this emotional emptiness through their unconditional love, support. A nurturing environment, combined with educational activities, healthy eating, and sports, laid a solid foundation for Ana's future. Unfortunately, the girl also faced health concerns. During a routine examination, the doctor discovered a tumor in her right ear, which caused hearing loss, as well as partial blindness in her right eye. Despite these difficulties, Ana grew into an energetic and joyful girl. However, her hearing and vision problems made studying difficult, leading to poor academic performance in elementary school. She attended consultations with specialists until the 3rd grade in order to keep up with her peers. In her everyday life, Ana took her challenges to heart. This affected her self-esteem and diminished her desire to live in this world. One day, while walking home and enjoying the fresh air with music playing through her favorite headphones, she encountered 4 boys who blocked her path. They made fun of her, one even pinched her. Ana ran home in tears and told her mother. Geraldine and Patrick took this incident seriously and filed a complaint against the boys, informing the police about the boy who had touched Ana. However, he was let off with just a warning. Consequently, the parents decided to accompany Ana to school and pick her up every day themselves, but this led to more ridicule. She vented her feelings on social media, seeking acceptance from her peers. This situation deeply affected Geraldine. It was painful for her to see how unhappy her daughter was. Soon, Ana began to inflict physical harm on herself to drown out the emotional pain. The parents realized the severity of the situation and worried that their child might take more drastic actions. Geraldine's only wish was for her daughter to be happy. Finally, Ana began to show signs of improvement thanks to personal therapy. She made some friends with whom she had sleepovers, went for walks, watched movies, discussed boys. As Ana's high school education was coming to an end, on a sunny day, May 13, 2018, Geraldine wanted to help her daughter prepare for a test. On weekends, they usually did their homework together. Their hard work, that day they decided to take a break. They turned on the TV, made popcorn, and watched a movie while hugging Ana's cousins. Geraldine joined them and ordered pizza. The children played games while the adults sipped wine and enjoyed snacks, filling the house with a joyful atmosphere. May 14, 2018, began as usual. Geraldine got on the train headed to Dublin while Anna went to school. After lunch, she had an appointment with a psychologist. Patrick, who had retired by this time, took the opportunity to sleep a little longer. Classes ended at 4 p.m., and Anna called her mother, but there was no answer because Geraldine was at an important meeting. She wrote a message to her daughter, saying that she would call back soon. When Anna came home, Patrick was relaxing in the garden and heard the doorbell. A young man was standing at the threshold. He was the same age as Anna. Patrick was not expecting guests, and Anna was surprised to see the guy. Patrick had never seen him before. Anna's joy was obvious. She whispered something to the guy, grabbed her favorite sweater, and told her father that she would be back soon. Patrick reminded her that she needed to study, which she had forgotten because of the sudden guest. He saw them leave for the park. Patrick was not immediately worried since the park was only a 20-minute walk from their home. At 5:10 p.m., Geraldine returned home and tried to call Anna, but she did not answer. Not wanting to overreact, she thought Anna would be home soon. However, Anna did not return. Patrick told his wife that Anna had gone to the park with some guy. This was strange considering Anna's difficulties with communication. Geraldine immediately texted Anna, asking her to come home. When there was still no answer, it alarmed the parents, especially considering Anna's previous issues with bullying and her health problems. Concerned, Geraldine decided to go to the park, but there were no traces of Anna there. Geraldine and Patrick began searching the streets in their car, trying to find any signs of Anna. Their fear deepened when they realized they knew nothing about the young man Anna had been with. By their own efforts proved unsuccessful, by 9 p.m., they reported Anna's disappearance to the police, emphasizing that her lack of response to calls and messages was out of character for her. They also informing the police about the unknown guy. The police quickly tracked down the young man, whose name was Boy B. His family was surprised by the police's arrival. Investigators asked Boy B to describe Anna's whereabouts, and he said that they had walked together until 5:40 p.m. before he went home. After that, the police began searching for Anna. They combed the area and reviewed footage from surveillance cameras. Patrick and Geraldine provided photographs of Anna, including one in which she was wearing the black sweatshirt she had worn in that evening. Supporters gathered around Geraldine and Patrick, while the police carefully studied video recordings showing Boy B and Anna in the park around 5 p.m. At 5:14 p.m., they left the park through a different exit, but after that, Anna seemed to have vanished without a trace. Her disappearance became a mystery. Progress in the investigation was made when they managed to find a witness who saw Anna and Boy B walking through the park. Video footage captured Boy B walking alone through the park at 5:49 p.m. Under pressure from the police, Boy B admitted that he was with another friend named Boy A. Boy A liked Anna, and Boy B was acting as an intermediary between them. With this new information, investigators intensified their efforts and began broadcasting information about the search for Anna across all social networks, as well as in local newspapers. Simultaneously, they searched for Boy A. His backpack was found. Video footage showed him entering and exiting the park, but he had been absent for a long time. Some opinions suggested that Anna might have run away, but this theory was quickly dismissed. To resolve the mystery of Anna's disappearance, detectives organized a step-by-step recreation of the events that had occurred in the park that day alongside Boy B and Boy A, under their parents' supervision. The interaction between the boys raised the police's suspicions, so they were separated for individual interrogations. Boy B's testimony remained consistent. Boy B began the interview the previous day by repeating what he had told police the previous week, that Boy A had asked him to call Anna's house, in Leixlip, just outside Dublin in County Kildare, and bring her to meet him at St. Catherine's Park, so they could talk. And that he had left Anna with Boy A before going home to do his homework. During the investigation, police reviewed more than 700 hours of CCTV footage from the area around where Anna went missing. The detectives, Daly and Gannon, repeatedly told Boy B that the route he claimed they had taken that day did not match what was recorded by cameras in and around St. Catherine's Park, which is on the Lucan side of Leixlip, on the border between County Kildare and County Dublin. But Boy B stuck to his story, offering various explanations to police about the inconsistencies between the CCTV footage and his account. They said that, on a later occasion, they were attacked by two strange men, resulting in a fight where Boy A hit one of the men on the head. Both men ran away. He then showed the police the injuries they had inflicted, including scratches on his arms and legs and a cut on his face. These men could have been responsible for Anna's disappearance, so the detectives needed their descriptions. The police also seized the boys' belongings to conduct examinations for DNA evidence of the attackers. As the investigation progressed, police brought in specialized search units, including divers and a rescue team, to check nearby bodies of water. In total, 60 people were involved in the search for Anna, including volunteers and the Kriégel family. Anna's disappearance became a sensational news story. Her photo in a black sweatshirt became a symbol of her search. Near the park, there is Glenwood House, a derelict farmhouse designed by James Gondon in the 19th century, located in the town of Coldblow, west of Lucan. One of the eyewitnesses reported seeing young people and police entering it, so the police went there to investigate. The house was 2 stories, sat on 42 acres of land. It was in ruins, with the roofs and walls having collapsed. It is unclear why the police had not checked there earlier. They conducted a thorough examination of both the house itself and the fields behind it. The search began in the park, where they meticulously searched every bush before gradually moving toward the abandoned house. The police checked the utility room while the volunteers searched the main building. It was very dark inside as there was no light in the room. The policeman was taken aback by the pungent smell filling the room. Once his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he realized that in front of him lay a naked female body, next to which lay clothes and a broken telephone. On the floor, there were traces of blood beside a brick and a large branch. Judging by the clothing, it was the body of Anna. There were multiple wounds on her body, and her neck was wrapped in duct tape. Her hand lay as if she had been trying to tear off the duct tape herself. It was evident that she had fought valiantly for her life. Her naked body, wearing only socks, lay among broken bottles and garbage. Many questions arose about how this could have happened, who was responsible for this crime. Why was Anna in this building? This incident irrevocably changed the lives of Geraldine and Patrick. The death of their long-awaited and beloved daughter was an indescribable tragedy for them. The whole city learned the details of what happened, and most people were in shock. Glenwood House, located near the park where children had played peacefully, was now the scene of a terrible crime. An autopsy revealed that Anna had sustained about a dozen wounds all over her body, including bruises and cuts, primarily on her head, face, and neck. The cause of death was attributed to blunt force trauma to the head, as well as asphyxiation, indicating that Anna had been abused. Based on the traces of semen found, it remains unclear whether she was conscious during the assault. Her death occurred between 5:25 and 5:54 p.m., just a few minutes after she left the park. At the entrance to the building, she was struck with a heavy stick that had nails sticking out of it before being hit with a brick. Blood on the walls and evidence suggested that the attacker dragged her body to the window, most likely to limit visibility for anyone outside. After collecting all the evidence, the police arrested 2 individuals. Boy B and Boy A, who were last seen with Anna, were suspected of the murder. In Boy A's backpack, a mask with the image of a zombie was found with traces of Anna's blood, along with gloves, shin guards, and knee pads. The semen found matched Boy A's DNA. Anna's blood was also located on his shoes and clothes. His mother believed he had been attacked and then washed his clothing. Boy A denied involvement in Anna's death despite the evidence found at the crime scene. No DNA was detected from Boy B, and there was no blood found on his belongings. During interrogation, Boy B admitted that he had seen Anna enter the abandoned house with Boy A but was unaware of his friend's intentions. Boy B wanted to approach the house but was frightened by screams at the entrance. He witnessed Boy A tearing off Anna's clothes and then turned to Boy B, his face reflecting the danger that prompted Boy B to remain silent. It later emerged that Boy A had shared his vile plans with Boy B. Both boys were released on bail pending a trial date, which angered local residents not only because they feared for their safety but also because the identities of the criminals had not been made public. Both boys came from respectable and successful families and had no criminal histories or psychological problems, which surprised the residents of the city. The hearing of their case took place on April 29, 2019. It was a closed hearing, attended by the parents of the defendants, as well as Geraldine and Patrick, who found the proceedings difficult but promised to defend their daughter to the end. The prosecutor stated that Boy B had lured Ana out of the house under the pretense of facilitating a meeting with Boy A, whom she liked, while Boy A took her to the abandoned house and abused her. The jury trial took place on June 18. Boy A was sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 12 years. Boy B was also found guilty in Ana's death, receiving a 15-year sentence with the possibility of parole after 8 years, despite the lack of material evidence. According to the law, their identities must remain confidential. If released, they would be given new identification. However, the harshest sentence was borne by Ana's parents, as Geraldine stated that life without Ana had ceased to hold meaning. Patrick died on June 19, 2022, haunted by the guilt of allowing his daughter to go with a stranger that day. The tragic loss of Ana Kriégel left an indelible mark on her family and the community of Leixlip. Geraldine and Patrick, who had poured their love, hope into building a joyful life for their adopted daughter, were shattered by her brutal murder. The conviction of Boy A and Boy B, though a step toward justice, could not fill the void left by Ana's absence. Ana's memory lives on in the hearts of those who loved her. Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, she managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17th from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25th, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in this story. Something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9th. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14th, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. The Lundy family lived a quiet life in Palmerston North, New Zealand, a cozy town with a pleasant atmosphere. The spouses' names were Mark Edward Lundy and Christine Marie Lundy. At this time, they had been married for 17 years. They almost never quarreled and had one child, a daughter named Amber. She was cheerful, sociable, and becoming a model student in her elementary school. Amber was also a member of the Scouts. The Lundy family owned a business, which Mark ran as the public face of the company, while Christine took on a significant portion of the administrative work. However, they chose a narrowly specialized activity that was not very popular. As a result, the business did not develop as they had hoped. Despite their stubborn efforts to invest and grow the business, they incurred losses, which ultimately left them with about $100,000 in debt. As their business prospects seemed bleak, Mark decided to seek alternative sources of income. In 1999, he purchased 2 plots of land in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, about a 2-hour drive from their family home, where he planned to invest in a winery and grape growing. He hoped this new venture would support him, but unfortunately, that did not materialize. He missed payments for the land, and due to late fees, the new business quickly began to incur even greater losses. Mark missed several payment deadlines, resulting in interest penalties of approximately 14%. At the time of the murder, the Lundy family owed $140,000 in interest penalties. The final deadline was August 30, 2000, the day his wife and daughter were found dead. On the morning of August 29, 2000, Mark went to Pet One, near Wellington, about 150 km from Palmerston North, to address some business-related matters and to sell a couple of kitchen sinks, which was a common task for him. Around 5 p.m. that same day, he checked into a motel in Pet One. Half an hour later, he called Christine, and they spoke for 8 minutes. She shared her plans of taking Amber out to dinner at McDonald's. After their conversation, she made another call to a friend and then left with Amber for dinner. Later, a receipt from the cafe was found at their home, but there was no further news from Christine. The next morning, Mark went to more meetings. He called Christine again, but she did not answer. After waiting some time and trying twice more, he found it strange that she was not responding. Normally, she would answer right away. Concerned, Mark decided to reach out to Christine's friend, but she seemed rushed and unable to help. At around 9 a.m., Glenn Wedgery, Christine's brother, went to Lundy's house to see Christine about his GST return. A horrifying scene unfolded before his eyes as he entered the house. He saw both Christine and Amber in tragic situations. Immediately, Glenn notified the police and Mark. Upon arriving in Palmerston North, Mark found that the road to their house was blocked by police. He was detained and told he needed to go with them to the station because his wife and daughter were deceased. Overwhelmed with grief, Mark could not believe what they were telling him and was visibly distraught. The officers decided that the news was too much for him, so they took him to the station in a patrol car. Once at the station, Glenn was already there. Glenn owned a small business and occasionally sought help from Christine with administrative issues. On the morning of August 30th, he first called Christine to confirm whether she was busy, but she did not answer. Knowing that his sister was responsible and unlikely to cancel a planned meeting at the last minute, he decided to go to her house. Rarely using the main entrance, and out of habit as a close relative, he entered through the back door. To his surprise, Glenn found that the back door was wide open and it was suspiciously quiet inside. At first, he decided not to attach any importance to it. He walked inside and greeted the family, but no one answered. When Glenn walked around the house, he understood why he was being ignored. First, Glenn found Amber. More precisely, he thought it was Amber because given the state of the body, it was difficult to identify the girl. She showed no signs of life. He checked her pulse and confirmed that she was dead. Glenn noticed how badly her head was disfigured. It looked like a bloody mess. Then, he found his sister lying naked in bed. Her head and face were also badly disfigured. Glenn immediately called the police. While waiting for law enforcement, he remained in the house, sitting at the kitchen table, not understanding what could have happened to his loved ones. When the police and paramedics arrived on the scene, they immediately assessed the scale of the attacker's cruelty. The scene showed that both Christine and Amber had been attacked with such fury that parts of their brain and skull fragments were found on the floor and walls. A large piece of brain matter was even found on the ceiling in Christine's bedroom. Judging by the position of the bodies, it seemed Christine had tried to escape, but the attacker caught up with her in the hallway and beat her to death with blows to the head from a heavy object. The house was carefully examined, and it turned out that only Christine's jewelry box was missing. The police had no clues. Forensic experts were only able to find a broken latch on one of the windows, suggesting the thief probably entered through it. Additionally, there was a small blood stain here, which seemed too far from the scene of the attack and was likely left by the criminal. Despite the fact that some valuables were missing, this crime did not appear to be related to robbery and seemed more personal in nature, given the severity of the attack. Mark was obviously traumatized by the news of his family's death. Even when he was brought to the police station, he still could not formulate his thoughts coherently. However, after a while, he calmed down and was able to communicate with law enforcement officers. He described in detail the last day of his trip on the eve of the massacre. He had a reliable alibi since he was in another city engaged in selling kitchen sinks, which was confirmed by numerous witnesses. Mark described his nearly two-decade marriage as a sincere and loving relationship, but admitted that he had not had intimacy with his wife for quite some time, which seemed like a serious contradiction. Mark was reluctant to go into intimate details about his marriage, as if he were hiding something. Nevertheless, during questioning, he admitted that to compensate for the lack of an intimate life, he periodically used escort services. While Mark was at the motel, he read a book, drank half a bottle of rum, called a business partner at 8:28 p.m., and then at 11:30 p.m. contacted an escort agency and used the services of a call girl. He left the motel early in the morning and went on business, and by 8 a.m., he was already selling sinks. Mark's first client also told the police that he had tried to contact his wife several times that morning, but she had ignored his calls. After Mark's interrogation, the police were almost certain that he was innocent. At least, he did not raise any suspicions. The only questionable point in his story was his regular infidelity, which he had tried to hide during the early stages of the interrogation. As a result, his behavior was attributed to guilt over his infidelity. Mark was released, but they did not remove him from the list of suspects, as further checks of many facts were necessary since husbands are often responsible for such crimes. Law enforcement agencies briefly mentioned that Christine and Amber had died from multiple blows to the head from a heavy object, something like a weapon or small axe. However, nothing like this could be found at the scene of the massacre. A later forensic examination allowed investigators to find remnants of Fleck brand paint in the victim's hair, and its color was identical to that which Mark used to mark his own tools in case he lent them to someone. After comparing these facts, the police began searching for something like an axe that could be on the list of Mark's tools. Mark confirmed that there should be an axe in the garage, but it was not found during the search. The tool had disappeared. The most suitable place to dispose of the weapon was a river flowing near the crime scene. Several groups of divers combed the bottom but found nothing. Despite this, the detectives were sure that Mark was not involved in the murder and that the criminal had simply used his axe. However, this belief was not universally shared. At the funeral of his wife and daughter, Mark was heartbroken. He cried during the entire service, could not even get up when everyone else did. He had to be escorted to the car because he could not walk normally. Many thought that Mark was simply overacting, trying to hide his guilt and confuse everyone. While Mark's family supported him in every way and confirmed that it was very difficult for him. However, the rumors proved impossible to stop. Everywhere Mark went, people looked for some kind of catch and tried to find a way to incriminate him. It got so bad that the police even had to hold another press conference at which law enforcement officers confirmed that Mark was essentially another victim in this situation, just like the deceased, so he was not considered a suspect in the murder. At the same time, forensic experts continued to collect information, and inconsistencies began to emerge. It turned out that a few hours before the murder and for several hours afterward, Mark's phone was disabled. This was contrary to the usual activity of a man who often received calls. Then a woman came to the police station, introducing herself as a neighbor of the Lundy family, Margaret Dance. The witness reported that on the night of that fateful day, she went to a choir rehearsal at about 7:15 p.m. As she was leaving, she saw a stout man running down the street, dressed in overalls, with light curly hair that looked like a wig. It seemed that it was a man trying to disguise himself as a woman. When the stranger ran past her, she recognized Mark. He ran by without saying a word or turning around. Margaret was sure that it was Mark, who should not have been in the area because of his absence, and all of this seemed suspicious. Following this statement, the police officers decided to check on Mark again. This time, they obtained a warrant to search his car, exposing the interior thoroughly. Mark admitted that he had driven it on the night of the 30th. Having analyzed the clothing found, forensic experts discovered two stains resembling blood, a large drop that belonged to Mark and a smaller one that belonged to Christine. However, the second stain was very small. Given the brutal nature of the massacre, the criminal should have stained much more, considering that the walls and even the ceiling were splattered with blood. Forensic experts suggested that the trace could have appeared on Mark's shirt before. Perhaps Christine accidentally cut herself while cooking and stained her husband's shirt. The other blood stain belonged to Mark and was much larger. In its center, forensic scientists found a small mucus substance the size of a grain of rice. They assumed that the owner of the shirt might have blown his nose into it but decided to conduct a more thorough analysis. For this, they invited an expert who used a new testing technique called immunohistochemistry. Based on the results, the specialist concluded that the mucus substance was indeed a piece of Christine's brain, which could not have ended up on Mark's shirt. Investigators suggested that these particles got onto the shirt via the jumpsuit, which had most of the bloodstains, that Mark simply disposed of the clothes by throwing them into a garbage container far from his home. It seemed probable that Mark was indeed near the crime scene at the time of the murder. After checking the chronology of events, detectives realized there was a 3-hour window for which Mark had no confirmed alibi. To accurately determine the time of death of the victims, additional tests were required. The forensic expert examined the contents of the stomach of the deceased, concluded that the time of death for Christine and Amber coincided with the 3-hour window that Mark needed to account for. To prove that he could have made such a long trip, the police obtained a receipt for Mark's gasoline purchase, then compared the amount of gasoline he used that day, questioned him in detail, and calculated the approximate mileage. However, it turned out that he consumed much more gasoline than was required for the trip to and from the city, about twice as much. All this did not fit into the overall picture and raised even more suspicions against Christine's husband. Now, detectives began to take Mark seriously as the main suspect in the double murder. According to investigators, after the massacre, he broke the window latch and stole a jewelry box. He also undressed his wife to confuse the investigation with contradictory details. Then, he disposed of the murder weapon, overalls, and the blonde wig he had been wearing that morning. After that, he went to a neighboring town to sell the stolen items while maintaining the illusion that the situation was normal. He even created a fuss and called his friend, asking her to check what had happened to Christine. In turn, Mark continued to insist on his innocence. The investigators lacked direct evidence: a jumpsuit, a wig, a jewelry box, and an axe. All of these were missing, making it impossible to take fingerprints. The detectives decided to verify their conclusions by independently driving the route that the alleged criminal should have taken in 3 hours. With great difficulty and constant speeding, they managed to approximate the time gap theoretically. Given a sufficient reserve of time and not wasting it, Mark could have dealt with his family. It was surprising how he managed to avoid being stopped for constant speeding on the way in both directions. The motive for the crime was still in question. After all, the Lundy spouses seemed to be a loving couple, making it hard to believe that Mark was capable of killing his wife and daughter. The detectives decided to investigate issues in the family's financial situation. As it turned out, on August 28th, the day before the murder, Mark received a notice that he urgently needed to make a payment for vineyard land, or he could lose it. He had only 5 days to do so, and the penalty for failing to comply was significant: $140,000, a sum the family did not have. On the same day, Mark suggested to Christine that they increase the amount of her life insurance policies from $200,000 to $500,000. They followed through, although there was naturally no reasonable justification for such additional expenses. A day later, someone dealt with Christine and child. All this seemed even more premeditated given the timing. When his wife and daughter died, the new policy had not yet taken effect. In fact, even if his bloody plan succeeded, Mark would not have received the expected payout. After Christine's death, however, the insurance company paid $75,000 toward the mortgage, but Mark never saw it. In February 2001, Mark, whom law enforcement initially supported, was arrested for the murders of Christine and Amber. He was denied bail and awaited the start of the hearing behind bars. The trial was scheduled for 2002. The prosecution claimed that he killed his wife and daughter for the insurance money, with his primary target being his wife. Amber became an accidental victim. He did not intend to harm her, but when the girl witnessed the murder, he was forced to take action. The jury heard the entire list of arguments and evidence against Mark. Unfortunately, the prosecutor's office lacked the murder weapon, but they believed that the evidence of his guilt was already sufficient to convince the jury. Mark, contesting the prosecution's claims, had his defense attorney argue that a loving husband would never harm his family. The lawyer pointed out apparent gaps and inconsistencies in the prosecution's tactics. After considering both sides, the jury deliberated for 7 hours. Mark was found guilty of double murder and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 17 years. However, the fight for his freedom was just beginning. Only the lawyers and Mark were dissatisfied with the verdict. They promptly began the appeals process, but 4 months later, the appeal was rejected and the minimum time for parole was increased to 20 years. Interestingly, at this point, Mark's support grew even more, contrasting with his initial situation after the tragic death of his family. The prosecution provided a highly questionable timeline that seemed far-fetched. In light of this, those who previously considered Mark a killer began to shift their stance. The 3-hour time frame in which the crime occurred appeared implausible, given the journey and the disposal of evidence involved. Even with a high speed of about 120 kilometers per hour, the police could only travel from city to city in approximately 1 hour and 33 minutes. It would have taken even more time to deal with 2 victims and dispose of the murder weapon, in addition to returning. All of this seemed unrealistic. To dispute the allegations, even a drop of brain matter found on Mark's shirt was scrutinized, as the method of analysis used was deemed too inaccurate. 7 years after the trial, an article was published about the tragic massacre of the Lundy family, detailing arguments that were previously unknown to the public. It meticulously refuted all the prosecution's claims, even questioning the words of the neighbor, Margaret. Some inconsistencies, including the time frames she provided, did not match the prosecution's narrative. At the trial, she indicated that the murders were committed the evening before a scheduled visit, claiming to have seen a man at about 7:15 p.m. She stated that at that moment there were 7 people standing near the takeaway food shops who should also have seen Mark in disguise. However, none of them saw him running around the area in a wig. The prosecutor insisted that Mark had changed the time on his computer and had cleaned the system, but later, upon inspection, it was discovered that the hard drive had, in fact, been infected with a virus that was randomly corrupting files. Mark simply didn't know about it yet. At that point, even a reanalysis of the paint found in Amber's hair failed to find a match with the substance that Mark had used to clean his tools. The defense insisted that the police had focused on Mark from the very beginning. All attempts to acquit him from the start were more likely made to divert attention, a way to gain trust. The authorities had several other suspects who did not even have an alibi, but they were simply ignored. Soon after the article was published, Mark's defenders filed another appeal and turned to the highest judicial instance in New Zealand. This became the last chance to acquit Mark. The preliminary hearings took place in 2013, and the lawyers prepared a strong case that provided answers to all the controversial allegations of the prosecution. Thanks to this, everyone began to seriously doubt Mark's guilt. His defenders even secured his family's bail after 18 months pending trial, and this has been ongoing for 12 years. The hearings began in the spring of 2015, and interestingly, the prosecution radically changed its tactics. The prosecutor's office completely reworked the timeline, claiming that Mark committed the murder at night after returning home from a visit with a call girl, giving him enough time to get home, have breakfast in a cafe in another city, and continue his business trips. According to eyewitnesses, he behaved quite calmly and was in a good mood. Some of the controversial arguments were discarded, while others were reworked to better fit the situation. The prosecution clearly did not intend to give up. Even new witnesses appeared. For example, a cleaner who went to Lundy House on the 28th said that she sensed a lot of tension between the spouses. The defense also intended to present compelling arguments. New technologies now allowed for a different approach to assessing evidence. DNA samples from 2 unidentified men were found under the fingernails of Christine, which did not match the materials belonging to Mark. Additionally, it was discovered that during the initial investigation, the police had ignored several compelling pieces of evidence. For example, dark hair found in Christine's hand clearly did not belong to her. 10 hairs were found under the right fingernail and 11 under the left. The hairs were sent to the ESR for testing in 2 plastic bags. The bags remained untouched at the ESR for 9 months and were then returned to the police in June 2001. After his conviction in 2002, Mark wrote to the police asking that all material relating to his case be preserved. The police ignored this request and destroyed the hairs in December 2003. Detective Inspector Mark Hercock, the lead investigator at the 2015 retrial, confirmed that the hairs had never been examined or tested. The lawyer provided a new theory, suggesting that the killer could have been Glenn, Christine's brother, the very person who discovered the bodies and waited in the kitchen for the police to arrive. He had explained the scratch on his nose as a mark from a domestic cat, which led the police to leave him alone. At that time, however, the police had searched Christine's brother's house and car. They used luminol and found blood stains in both, but did not investigate further, which could have belonged to the murdered women. Glenn's neighbor admitted that he had long suspected Glenn of the murder because he had witnessed Glenn trying to dispose of some clothes. During the hearings, the prosecution claiming that Christine's brother had unhealthy tendencies and had molested Christine, leading to the deaths when she discovered it. Naturally, by this point, the defense had lost significant arguments to support these theories, as a lot of time had passed and traces were no longer available. Another strong point for the defense involved communication with an expert who identified the brand on the shirt. According to him, he had worked in a laboratory not intended for this kind of analysis, the technique was completely new and untested, and he likely made mistakes. The defense argued that the stains on the shirt could have originated from a meat pie. New studies were conducted with the best specialists, but they all concluded that the sample was poorly preserved and unsuitable for analysis. The only thing they could confirm was that the stain was from human tissue, but its origin was unknown, hence, this evidence was excluded as unreliable. Margaret was also not invited to the courtroom, and her testimony was disregarded. The defense presented a new theory regarding what could have happened to Christine and Amber. They argued that shortly before the murders, the family began receiving threats regarding debts, suggesting that someone came to the Lundy house to intimidate Mark into paying them off more quickly. This argument sounded quite convincing, but the prosecution insisted that only Mark had a substantial motive to get rid of his loved ones due to mounting financial problems and fear of being exposed by his wife as a bankrupt. The increase in the life insurance policy right before the murders seemed suspicious to the prosecutor and could not be considered coincidental. The jury deliberated for more than 15 hours. After these hearings, many jurors hesitated and could not reach a consensus. The Supreme Court upholding the previous verdict, Mark was sent back to jail to serve the remaining 8 years of his 20-year sentence before he could apply for parole. However, the defense did not give up and attempted to file an appeal in 2017, which became possible after changes in legislation. They focused on the obvious errors in the investigation and inconsistencies in the prosecution's version, but the court confirmed the sentence once more. The Court of Appeal ruled that the mRNA evidence was new science that had never been used before or since and should not have been presented to the jury, but upheld Mark's conviction. This was the interim provision, the mechanism that allowed the Court of Appeal to dismiss Mark's appeal. Mark's lawyer, Jonathan Eaton QC, then argued in the High Court that Mark had been the victim of junk science, and in May 2019 he was granted leave to appeal to the High Court, based solely on the interim provision argument. On December 20, 2019, the New Zealand High Court dismissed Mark's appeal, stating in its closing that other evidence demonstrates beyond reasonable doubt that Mr. Mark murdered Christine and Amber Lundy. Mark remained unable to fight for his freedom until 2022 when, in August, he was given the right to apply for parole. He was hopeful for release, but the commission refused, citing that he did not provide a plan to address his aggression issues. He maintained that he had not killed anyone and had no anger management problems, making it impossible for him to create such a plan. Despite the denial, a retrial of the appeal took place in May 2003. This time, the counsel sought to understand what motivated him regarding his family. Mark again insisted on his innocence, stating he would rather die in prison than admit to something he didn't do. This only worsened his situation, as he was denied release and required to undergo rehabilitation for alcohol issues he had faced before his imprisonment. Mark's relatives supported him, understanding he could not confess to a murder he did not commit, as this would destroy his struggle for freedom that had lasted for 2 decades. However, he remains hopeful of ever being released and continues to insist on his innocence. In 2025, North and South journalist Mike White revealed that other forensic evidence, such as hair samples from Christine's fingernails, had never been tested. A scientist had found blood-soaked fibers on a window next to the door where police believed the perpetrator had entered the Lundys' home. Police had also sent these fibers to the Institute of Environmental Science and Research, but again, they had never been tested. Police could not explain why the fibers had never been tested. After another hearing in April 2025, Mark was pardoned after serving 23 years in prison. He is scheduled to be released in May. He will face a variety of restrictions including a ban on online dating, social media, and media interviews. He will be required to notify his probation office of any relationships or employment. The tragic case of the Lundy family remains one of New Zealand's most controversial and polarizing criminal cases. After over 2 decades of legal battles, Mark Lundy's pardon in April 2025, following 23 years of imprisonment, marked a significant turning point. The untested forensic evidence, such as the hair samples and blood-soaked fibers, raised serious questions about the integrity of the original investigation and the reliability of the evidence used to convict him. While some continue to believe in Mark's guilt, Citing the financial motive and the timing of the insurance policy increase, others argue that the prosecution's case was built on circumstantial evidence and flawed science, leaving room for reasonable doubt. Mark's release, accompanied by strict probation conditions, reflects the ongoing tension between justice and uncertainty in this case. As he steps into a new chapter of his life, the unresolved questions surrounding the deaths of Christine and Amber Lundy continue to haunt those seeking the truth.